Don't talk. The words were sharp, cold, and dangerous, like a blade pressing against bare skin. Maria froze in the dimly lit hallway of the Hale mansion, her heart leaping into her throat. She had heard whispers before, arguments between rich couples, drunken fights at parties, but this voice was different. This one carried the weight of a threat. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her shift had ended over an hour ago. The other staff had already left, and the mansion had gone quiet, the way it always did once the lights dimmed and the family retreated to their wing. But Maria had stayed behind. She often did. She was careful, diligent, the kind of maid who made sure every corner gleamed before leaving. Tonight, she had gone upstairs to finish dusting the library shelves. That was when the sound drifted down the hall, the voice that made her pause. Curiosity tugged at her, but it was fear that gripped her body as she followed the hushed tones to the heavy oak door of Richard Hale's private study. She knew she shouldn't be here. She was invisible in this house, just a maid. If anyone caught her snooping, she'd lose the job that kept food on her table and her sick mother's medicine stocked. But something inside told her she had to look. Slowly, she edged closer, pressing her ear to the narrow crack in the doorway. And what she saw on the other side made her blood turn to ice. Richard Hale, her employer, the billionaire tycoon who owned half the city, sat bound to his own leather chair. His wrists were tied tight against the armrests, his face pale, his shirt rumpled. And standing over him was his wife, Veronica Hale. Perfect, glamorous Veronica, the woman Maria had often admired from afar, always stepping into black cars with diamonds glittering at her throat. But tonight, her beauty was twisted into something sinister. Beside her stood another man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cruel smirk curling his lips. His hand rested heavy on Richard's shoulder, forcing him down. Maria clutched her chest, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. Veronica's voice was cold, dripping with venom. "Don't talk, Richard. Don't waste your strength. Just sign the papers, and this will all be over." Maria's knees nearly gave out. She had walked into something terrible, something far darker than she ever imagined. Richard's wife wasn't just cheating. She was plotting. Her eyes darted back to Richard, the man who had built an empire from nothing, who had once paused in the library to ask her name, to thank her for her work. And now he sat helpless, betrayed by the very person who was supposed to love him. Maria pressed her hand over her mouth, heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't meant to hear this. She wasn't meant to be here at all. But she couldn't walk away, because at this moment, she realized, if she didn't act, Richard Hale might not live to see another sunrise. From the shadows of the hallway, Maria's body trembled, but her ears strained to catch every word. She pressed herself closer to the crack in the door, afraid that even the sound of her breathing would give her away. Inside the study, Veronica Hale paced back and forth like a queen who had finally claimed her throne. The diamonds on her wrist glistened under the soft golden light, but her words were filled with venom. She leaned close to her bound husband and hissed, "You were never supposed to live this long, Richard. You've built everything, but now it belongs to me." She dropped a stack of crisp papers on the desk in front of him. Legal documents. Maria couldn't see the details, but she didn't need to. She understood enough. Veronica wanted it all. Her lover, the tall man whose presence filled the room with menace, shoved Richard's shoulder, forcing him to sit straighter. His name was Colin. Maria remembered seeing him once or twice in passing, introduced as Veronica's business consultant. But now, the truth was clear. He wasn't there to consult. He was there to intimidate. Colin's deep voice rumbled like thunder. "Sign the transfer papers, old man. Stop wasting time. The more you resist, the more painful this will get." Richard, despite the ropes digging into his skin, lifted his head. His jaw clenched with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "You think you can take what I built with lies and betrayal?" His voice cracked with fury. "You'll never get away with this." Maria's stomach tightened. She had never seen her employer look so vulnerable, so human. To the world, Richard Hale was untouchable, a billionaire with power in every corner of the city. But here, tied to a chair, betrayed by his wife, he looked like any other man facing the end. Veronica laughed, a cold, mocking sound that sliced through the room. "Get away with it? Oh, Richard, you've been blind for too long. Nobody cares about loyalty anymore. Not in this world. Money, power, control, That's all that matters. She ran her perfectly manicured hand over the papers. And soon, it will all be mine. Maria's hand tightened on the edge of the door. A war raged inside her. She was just a maid. Poor, unnoticed, a shadow in a mansion filled with wealth. What chance did she stand against people like Veronica and Colin? If she stepped into that room, they would silence her forever. But if she walked away, Richard would surely be finished. Her mind flashed back to a small moment months ago. She had been dusting the shelves in the library when Richard had paused his reading, looked at her, and said something she never forgot. Loyalty is priceless, Maria. Never forget that. Now those words struck her like lightning. Loyalty. It wasn't about money or power or who was weak and who was strong. It was about doing what was right, even when it terrified you. Maria's chest heaved as she backed away from the door, her pulse racing. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't call the police. They wouldn't come fast enough. She couldn't fight Colin. He was twice her size. But there had to be a way. For the first time in her life, Maria understood. The fate of a billionaire, and maybe even her own life, was in her hands. Maria's mind raced as she backed away from the study door, her body trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. She had seen enough to know the truth. Richard Hale's life was hanging by a thread, and no one was coming to save him. Her first instinct screamed, "Call the police." She clutched her old, scratched cell phone with trembling hands, fumbling to unlock it. But then the memory of that chilling whisper echoed in her ears. "Don't talk." Veronica had spat it at her husband, but Maria felt it like a warning aimed at her as well. If she dialed, if she made a sound, if they heard her voice, she would be next. Her thumb hovered over the call button, but she froze. She could already picture it. The police would take too long, and by the time they arrived, Richard might already be gone. No, calling wasn't an option. Her eyes darted around the darkened kitchen, searching desperately for anything she could use. The drawers rattled as she yanked them open, each clatter sounding like thunder in the silence. Finally, her shaking hands closed around a small kitchen knife. It wasn't much, just a simple tool for slicing bread or fruit, but right now, it felt like the only weapon she could wield. She gripped the handle tight, her knuckles white. Her breath came in shallow gasps. What am I doing? I'm just a maid. I can't fight them. I'll get myself killed. But then another thought came, one that stopped her cold. If I don't try, Richard will die, and I'll live knowing I did nothing. Her eyes welled with tears, but her jaw hardened. She had been invisible her whole life, overlooked, underestimated. Nobody ever expected the maid to matter, and maybe that was her one advantage. They wouldn't see her coming. Maria slipped the knife into her apron pocket and crept back toward the study, her ears straining for every sound. She could hear Colin's voice, low, threatening, as he forced Richard's hand closer to the papers. Veronica's heels clicked against the marble floor as she paced impatiently. Maria's pulse thundered in her ears. She couldn't fight them head-on. She needed a distraction, something to throw them off balance, something that would buy her just a few precious seconds. She glanced down the hall, her eyes falling on a tall porcelain vase perched on a side table. Her heart pounded as she realized what she had to do. With a deep breath, she steadied her shaking hands, reached out, and pushed. The vase toppled and crashed to the floor with a deafening shatter. The sound echoed through the mansion like a gunshot. Inside the study, Veronica gasped. "What was that?" she hissed, her voice sharp with suspicion. Colin cursed under his breath, his heavy footsteps pounding as he stormed toward the door. Maria's chest tightened, fear threatening to swallow her whole, but she held her ground. She had bought herself a sliver of time, and sometimes a sliver was all it took. She pressed herself into the shadows, knife trembling in her hand, as the study door creaked open. The dangerous game had begun. What was that? Veronica snapped, her voice sharp with alarm. Colin's face twisted with fury. He released his grip on Richard and stormed toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. His heavy boots echoed in the hall as he searched for the source of the crash. Maria's chest felt like it would explode. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently she thought he might hear it. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she darted past the shadows and slipped into the study, knife trembling in her grip. Richard's eyes widened in shock when he saw her. His mouth opened, perhaps to warn her, perhaps to ask what she was doing, but she quickly pressed a finger to her lips. "Don't talk, sir." she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. Please, just trust me. For a moment, Richard Hale, the man who commanded boardrooms, silenced competitors, and built empires, hesitated like a child caught in the dark. But then something in Maria's eyes made him pause. Determination, fear, loyalty. Whatever it was, it silenced him. Her hands shook as she crouched down, cutting at the ropes that dug into his wrists. The knife wasn't sharp, but she sawed with all her strength, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, the cord snapped loose. Richard groaned softly as blood rushed back into his hands, leaving angry red marks. He stood, rubbing his wrists, his face burning with both fury and disbelief. Maria, he whispered, but she shook her head again. Not now. We have to go. Just then, footsteps thundered closer. Colin was returning. Maria's stomach lurched. There was no time. She grabbed Richard's arm, this towering billionaire twice her size, and tugged him toward the back exit of the study. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. Veronica's furious voice rang out behind them. Colin, they're getting away. Richard's jaw tightened, but Maria didn't let him stop. They darted through the mansion's long halls, shadows chasing them with every step. The opulence around them, marble statues, glittering chandeliers, seemed to blur into insignificance. In that moment, nothing mattered but survival. At the garage door, Maria's hands shook as she fumbled for the keys. She had spotted them earlier, dropped carelessly on a table near the door. Her fingers scrambled across the polished wood until they closed around the cold metal. Behind them, Colin's roar echoed through the hall. You'll regret this, Maid. Maria's breath came in ragged gasps as she jammed the key into the ignition. For a terrifying second, the car sputtered, refusing to start. Colin appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with rage, lunging toward them. Then vroom. The engine roared to life. Maria slammed her foot down, and the car shot forward, tearing through the garage doors with a crash. The mansion grew smaller in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the night. Richard sat beside her, chest heaving, eyes locked on her in disbelief. This poor Maid, the woman everyone overlooked, had just saved him from betrayal and death. But Maria kept her eyes on the road, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The danger wasn't over yet. By the time the first streaks of dawn colored the horizon, Richard Hale had already made the call. His voice, though hoarse and heavy with exhaustion, carried enough weight to send the police racing toward the Hale estate. Hours later, flashing red and blue lights bathed the mansion in harsh reality. Officers stormed inside, and Veronica Hale, still dressed in her silk gown, makeup smeared with fury, was led away in handcuffs. Colin, too, was dragged out, cursing and spitting threats. But their power was gone. Their plan was shattered. Richard had survived. At the hospital, doctors tended to the bruises on his wrists and the stress weighing down his chest. Maria lingered by the door, wringing her hands nervously. She still wore the same maid's uniform from the night before, wrinkled and dust-stained. She felt out of place in the sterile white room, surrounded by machines and nurses. She hadn't wanted to follow him here, but Richard had insisted. You saved my life, he told her on the drive, his voice steady despite everything. You stay with me. Now, as he lay propped up in the hospital bed, his gaze softened when it fell on her. He motioned for her to come closer. Maria hesitated, her throat tight. Sir, I only did what anyone would have done. Richard shook his head firmly. No, don't say that. Anyone else would have walked away. They would have thought of themselves first. But you, his voice caught, raw with emotion, you risked everything. For me. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. She lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. I was so afraid. But I remembered what you once told me. That loyalty is priceless. I couldn't just leave you. Richard reached out, his hand surprisingly gentle as it closed around hers. Maria, you didn't just save my company. You didn't just protect my wealth. You saved me. My life. And that is something I can never repay. Her lips trembled as she tried to hold back her tears. I wasn't looking for repayment, sir. I only wanted to do what was right. For a long moment, the powerful billionaire simply looked at the poor maid, his eyes filled with something few had ever seen in him. Gratitude, sincerity, even tenderness. Finally, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. From today, he said softly, you're no longer just a maid. Your family. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to protest, to say she didn't deserve such words. But deep down, she felt the truth of them. Something had changed forever in that mansion the night before. The world might still see her as invisible, poor, unimportant. But to Richard Hale, the man whose empire stretched across the city, she was the one who mattered most. As the morning sun spilled through the hospital window, Maria realized that sometimes the smallest voices, the quietest hearts, and the most overlooked souls could change everything. And all it took was the courage to act when it mattered most.